Welcome to Books of Our Time, brought to you by the Massachusetts School of Law and seen nationwide. Today we will discuss a book, Tom Brady versus the NFL, the case for football's greatest quarterback, which makes a compelling argument why our own number 12 really is the best ever. Who do you think is the best quarterback ever?
I think the best quarterback ever, and I'm a real Tom Brady fan. I think he is an unbelievable talent, but he's got Welker, he's got guys, and they all got guys that can really catch the ball and run with it after, and they get great lines. And something that's great. But where did the passing game come from? Who changed the game? It was Namath in the AFL, the old AFL. He took the ball to the air, and he had the quickest release and the quickest read, and he was big on audibles at the line of scrimmage. So I think he did that in Alabama, and he was from Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania. He's from a small town. He's a small town kid, and he just took the world by storm. And now at that time, he was so good that the AFL was going to the air. They were passing. Well, the NFL was still beating each other up between the 30 to 30-yard lines, right? And 7-6, tough watch game. Name it 40, 45 points, 400 yards. I think he changed the game. So I think a lot of the credit goes. Bobby Orr changed the game. Namath changed the game. Brady has done the best job with the game change. But I think he is the best around today, without question.
That's a good answer. With me to discuss the book is its author, Sean Glennon, a journalist and football historian. And I'm Holly Vietzke, a professor at the Massachusetts School of Law. Welcome, Sean. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So tell me, why did you write this book?
I wrote the book because I felt there was a strong argument to be made. I had a publisher that really wanted a Tom Brady book. This is my fourth book. All four of them have been Patriots themed. I wrote a book about Patriots fans, which was really a work of literary journalism, and then two books about the history of the team. And when the last of those, the publicity process on that was winding down, we started talking about another book, and the folks at Triumph Books said, well, we'd really like you to write a book about Tom Brady. And what they had in mind was a bio. And I said, no, I don't really have any interest in writing a book, a biography of Tom Brady. It's been done. Charlie Pierce wrote an amazing biography of Tom Brady. And I suspect that when Tom's career is over, he's going to write his own story or work with someone to tell his own story. And so I didn't want to be in a situation where I had the book in the middle, the great Charlie Pierce book about the emergent NFL star, where he had access to Tom's family and to Tom himself, and then Tom's own story, and then some sort of stepping stone plopped in the middle. So I just said, no, I'm not gonna do that. And we talked about some other ideas, and we kept going back and forth, and they kept saying, but we really want you to write a book about Tom Brady. We really want you to write a book about Tom Brady. And finally said, what's a book about Tom Brady that you would be comfortable writing? And I thought about it for a while, and this is, I guess, the spring of 2011. And I said, well, here's an idea. How about a book called 25 Reasons Tom Brady is Better Than Peyton Manning? And it was sort of a silly idea in my mind, because I think that argument has been settled for several years now. But it's one that's was alive in the minds of sports fans, and I thought I could have some fun with it. And if I was going to write a book about Tom Brady, I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time thinking about it. I just wanted to get through it so that I could move on to the next thing that I really wanted to do. And so I started working on that. But I can't let a thing be a simple thing, because I'm stupid. And so I have this lifelong interest in football history. So for me to look at Manning and Brady wasn't enough. I had to look at Manning and Brady as they related to the great quarterbacks, the great passers of the game. And I was doing that, and I was sort of working on that book. And Triumph, and in 2011, Peyton Manning didn't have a season. And there was some reason to wonder if he would have another season in him, if he would ever come back from that injury. And Triumph started getting a little bit antsy about it, saying, are we really going to publish a rivalry book about a rivalry that may be non-existent? And I said, well, here's the crazy thing about it is that it's not the book that really needs to be written. The book that really needs to be written is a book about how Tom Brady is the greatest who's ever played the game, because that's what I've figured out in researching this book. And so how about if we do that one? And they were a little nervous about that because you don't do a book like this while a guy's still playing. But we talked about it, and they decided to give it a go. And so I guess that's a sort of long answer to a short question, right?
So then, did you make up your mind that Tom Brady was the best while you were researching this book, or had you already thought he was the best before you started to work on the book?
Oh, no, I thought he was in the conversation. Certainly in the conversation of the top 5, and at the very least the top 10. It was really when I started to look at it in some depth that I came to the conclusion that he's the best. So I had come to that conclusion before I started writing this book, but I came to it in the process of putting together a book, just by sort of looking at the history and looking at the data, and it was a conclusion that I couldn't avoid.
It's evident that you did an incredible amount of research into this book. How long did this take you from the research to the writing, and then the writing to the finished product?
Well, that's a tough question to answer, because sort of 18 months. That's really the time from when I started working on a book about Tom Brady to when I finally turned in a manuscript to Triumph Books. In a way, I've been working on this book for 12 years because I've been watching this player's career since he took over from Drew Bledsoe in 2001. And I've written these books about Patriots history, and all of my books have been written during the Brady and Belichick era. So sort of 18 months and sort of 12 years and sort of 6 months too, because that's when I turned the corner from the light, easy, breezy Brady Manning book to this thing that very nearly killed me. This was a difficult book to assemble.
Why was it so difficult? Because the amount of statistics involved, or the comparisons over a wide range of years?
I think all of it. There were so many challenges in this book. One of them being the statistics. I like statistics. My wife says that I just like football for the math, and that's partially true. I like to sort of crawl into football statistics in particular and see what I can make of them. And I think statistics are important when you're writing a book like this, because statistics are the evidence of success in sports, particularly in football. You measure success by wins and losses, but you measure individual success according to a defined set of statistics. So I had to include a lot of statistics in this book. And there's a part of me that loves that. And there's also a part of me that understands that people really hate statistics. And the last thing you want to do is throw a bunch of statistics at somebody, because you put them to sleep, you lose them quickly. And then there's another part of me, and it's sort of the same person, who loves, what I really love is to tell a good story. I was an English major in college, and have had a career as a journalist and a writer, and my football history books, or my Patriots history books, are really about telling the stories. I'm not someone who walks around with a lot of dates or statistics in his head. I walk around with a lot of stories in my head. So I thought, great, we'll get the statistics person and the story person, and we'll get them together in a room, and we'll make this neat book. And it worked out that the statistics me and the storytelling me don't like each other very much, and really resisted working together. And so that was one of the challenges. This book involves a season by season review of Tom Brady's career, and that's where those two parts of my personality had to get together, and they didn't like it. The other challenge was that I needed to compare Tom Brady to the great quarterbacks who have played the game, the great passers who have played the game. And I didn't want to do that in a way that was going to be disrespectful of what these players have brought to the game. I start with Sammy Baugh, who was the first great passer in the NFL. And all the way up to the other great passers who are playing the game currently. And I didn't want to be in a position where these people who have brought a lot to the game were being torn down to make a case for Brady. I felt like if you're going to make a case for Brady, you got to make a case for Brady in the context of all this greatness, not by saying, Joe Montana wasn't that great anyway. You got to say Joe Montana was fantastic, and Brady's a little bit better. And so doing that was another challenge. And all of that stuff put together made this quite a project.
So what specifically makes Brady great?
I think there are a number of things that make Brady great. And I think that for me, greatness is greatness in football, particularly the quarterback position, is not simply something that one is born with or practices one's way to. It's because I think it's a combination of both ability and success over time. I think that there have been a lot of really talented quarterbacks in NFL history who didn't achieve greatness because they simply either they ended up on the wrong team or they couldn't translate their ability to the field, various reasons, and so they're not great. And there are certainly a lot of quarterbacks who have had some considerable success on the field, but perhaps for other reasons other than having incredible ability, and so then you start to ask, are they truly great, or were they just in the right place at the right time? I think that for me, what makes Tom Brady great is that he brings all of the elements of a great quarterback together. He has amazing physical gifts, and those include things that weren't necessarily measurable when he was coming out of college, or didn't get measured when he was coming out of college, which is how he ends up a sixth-round draft pick. But there are things that exist, and none of them are speed. But there's the pinpoint accuracy of his throwing. There's his uncanny ability to see the field, which to me is about athletic ability and about intelligence. There's his intelligence, which is, I think in Brady's case, more than simply a football intelligence. I don't know the man, but he clearly brings more to the table than, he really knows this one thing, this game. There's leadership, which he has demonstrated from the moment he arrived in Foxborough as a sixth-round draft pick. And that he continues to exhibit today, and then there's how those all sort of combine on the field to unparalleled success. He's the winningest quarterback by percentage in NFL history. He's one of two quarterbacks who's been to 5 Super Bowls. He's of those two, he's got the better record in the Super Bowl. He has the single season interception percentage record, which is nothing to sneeze at. He's in the up toward the top of the all-time rankings in passer rating and yards per attempt, and he brings all those measurables to the table. I think I've sort of wandered away from your question, but I think the question was what makes Tom Brady great, and I think it's a whole lot of things.
Have you encountered much opposition to your claim, either while you were researching or after the book was published?
I have. I live in New England, so it's not like I walk out my door and there's people waiting to hit me with a cardboard cutout of Joe Montana. But there are people out there, and I knew that there would be, who, in particular with Montana, who is, if you were to ask most football fans outside of New England today, they would tell you that Joe Montana was the greatest of all time. And many of them would say, is now and always will be. Joe Montana went to 4 Super Bowls and won them all. Joe Montana threw 11 touchdowns and no interceptions in the Super Bowl. Joe Montana, in many ways, was part of an offense that revolutionized the game of football. And people will say that they will never accept anybody else. Tom Brady could win 6 Super Bowls, and they will never accept anybody but Joe Montana as the greatest of all time. And there are people still, fewer of them, who still cling to Bart Starr as the greatest who ever was. And these are people who felt that Bart Starr was the greatest quarterback who ever played the game. I mean, he was, until Joe Montana came along, and who wouldn't give that up. And they're dwindling because people get older and die off, and even in Green Bay, where Starr played, there have been a couple of other, at least one other great quarterback, and another one currently playing who may be the person who supplants Brady in the near future. There's that level of resistance, and then there are diehard Peyton Manning fans who can't accept the fact that Tom Brady has almost always been a better quarterback than Peyton Manning, and who for whatever reason need to believe that Manning is the greatest playing now, the greatest that there ever was, and they're certainly not going to accept Brady as that person. So I run into those people. I run into them more on the internet than I run into them in real life. I've run into a few people who have politely told me, yeah, I see what you're saying with Brady, but it's still Montana. That's all right. I mean, I think there's a great case to be made for Montana still. And I've said from the outset with this book that if you read this book and you can look at me and say, I think you made a great case, but you're wrong. It's Montana. I don't care. It's Montana. It's Manning. It's Starr. It's Favre. If you want to go there, that's all right with me, as long as you feel like I did my job.
Which of the quarterbacks that you compare Brady to in the book do you think comes the closest in terms of greatness to Brady? Is it in fact Montana? Is it Baugh?
Oh, I think it's Montana. I think when you sort of look at career accomplishments, particularly again with Montana, those 4 Super Bowls, the 11 touchdowns and no interceptions, that's an amazing standard to have set. But also when you look at their sort of career accomplishments, their career stats on the whole, Brady only comes out a little bit better than Montana. I suspect that will change. Brady is not done playing yet, as we sit here today, and says that he's 35 years old. He says he wants to play until he's 40. If he continues along the path that he's going down now, and 6 months ago I would say, well, you can't keep it up like this. But Brady is playing better at age 35 than perhaps he's ever played in his career. So who am I to say? He'll get to the point where he's just so far ahead of Montana in all of his complete career statistics that it will be hard to make the argument for Montana. But as of right now, Montana, it's a pretty close call.
Here in New England, you might expect widespread support for the claim that Brady is the best ever. But we polled some faculty, staff, and students here at the Massachusetts School of Law, and the results were somewhat surprising.
I think I have a little background to have some info, I guess, on this question here. I've played football professionally for the last 8 years, bounced around with some NFL opportunities, but mostly arena football, indoor ball. And as for the question of who's the best quarterback in the NFL right now, I think it's a toss-up between Brady, Aaron Rodgers, and then I'll throw Peyton Manning in there just because he's had a great comeback season, and also Drew Brees. But I think you can make an argument for either 4 of those guys. And go with Tom as the #1 guy, just because he's made the most out of, I think, having the least around him at the skill positions at wide receiver, which I play, so I have a strong opinion about the receiver position as well. But I think he's made those guys into, some regular, normal, average receivers into some Pro Bowl type receivers year after year. And he's always made them better and made the team better. So, and if he could have pulled, one of the last 3 opportunities that he had to go to Super Bowl off, then it would have been, would have made a big difference. He would have been up there with Montana for Super Bowls, but you know, he has his team in a position to win a Super Bowl every single year, year after year. So it's hard to, you know, it's hard to argue with that. But as far as best quarterback ever, you know, I think it goes by winning championships. You know, you could say Dan Marino, you know, as far as, you know, putting up numbers, but when it comes to championships, it's definitely Joe Montana, and I think that'd be the only guy that Tom is chasing right now to go down as the best quarterback in history.
In my opinion, the greatest quarterback in the NFL is Tom Brady, and I might be partial to it because I've lived here my whole life and I witnessed him win his first Super Bowl on my birthday when I was 18 years old. But even despite this past Sunday and the 2 interceptions, still the only guy that I want on the field when that game's on the line. Sometimes you get it done, sometimes you don't. But to me, in the current NFL, it's still Brady. Who's the greatest quarterback of all time? My answer might be a little bit different. I think that had Brady won in 2007 or last year or this year, and he got to 4 Super Bowls, then he might be the greatest quarterback of all time. But I think that what we've seen here over the last couple years is that it's not as easy as he made it look back in 2001 and 2003 and 2004. So my answer for greatest quarterback of all time is still going to have to be Mr. Joe Montana.
We're here to talk about who's the best quarterback. My opinion is Joe Montana is the best quarterback because he won 4 Super Bowls and he has the most playoff wins at that time. And he probably would have won more in San Francisco if San Francisco never let him go. Nothing against Steve Young, but he would have won more if he was still there than Steve Young has only won 1 there. But there was no loyalty in San Francisco, and Joe Montana was in Kansas City. Now, today's best quarterback, I would have to say, is Brady and Peyton Manning, but Brady won more Super Bowls. And Brady knows the offense pretty well, passes well, he could read the defense. He also won the most, broke the record of Joe Montana's playoff record of wins. And he has 2 MVPs. He has the most yards in the playoffs. So you got to say it's Brady right now. But of all time, it's going to be always Joe Montana.
I think the greatest quarterback of all time would be Joe Montana. However, I do lean toward Broadway Joe as one of the greatest quarterbacks, since he was a great quarterback for the University of Alabama, Roll Tide. And I think the greatest quarterback right now would be Tom Brady.
Tom Brady is the best quarterback of all time. Even though he lost in the last game he played, if you compare statistics and the amount of touchdowns and yards he's put up with a cast of characters who, I think Shannon Sharp said it, probably isn't going to the Hall of Fame. It's unbelievably impressive, and without question, you'd have to give the nod to him, although since I didn't see Joe Montana growing up, I can't really compare, but in the past 26 years, Tom Brady, bar none.
And the best quarterback this year was Tom Brady. Best stats, and although 2 weeks ago he wasn't the best, but he had a great regular season. Best quarterback of all time was Joe Montana until Tom Brady passed him for most wins, and he's the best quarterback ever. Montana was a different era. Montana had, I think the players are bigger, faster, stronger now, and you have to think the game a heck of a lot quicker than Joe Montana did. And Montana had a heck of an arsenal. Jerry Rice, Steve Young, great running back, excellent defense. That's why they won so much.
The best quarterback in the NFL today is probably Tom Brady. Of all time, without a doubt, is Joe Montana. He's 4-0 in the Super Bowl.
Well, in today's NFL, it's pretty tough, but you got to say it's Tom Brady. And in the history of the NFL, it's still Tom Brady. No one else has won 17 playoff games. And I'm old enough to remember a lot of the great ones. Namath could have been a great quarterback, but his knees gave out. Montana was a great quarterback, but again, Brady's statistics are over and above what anyone else has ever done in the NFL.
Well, today for the NFL, I would have to say, being a person from Massachusetts, that Tom Brady is probably the best NFL quarterback today. Even though I think the league is changing from what used to be a throwing league to now where you need a running quarterback to be able to scramble and score like you have for San Francisco and Baltimore. The best quarterback of all time, I would have to say, is Joe Montana. He was just always a great scrambler. When he was older, he was still able to scramble. He got 4 Super Bowl rings, and he had great help with Jerry Rice, of course. And that would be my opinion of quarterbacks today and quarterbacks of the past.
How difficult was it to compare the different eras?
Extraordinarily, because the game has changed. You know, in many ways, I think this is a book about Tom Brady, but it's also a book about the evolution of the NFL passing game over the past 75 years. You know, in 1937, the Washington, which is 75 years ago now, the Washington Redskins put Sammy Baugh on the field, and the idea in the NFL at that time was that you couldn't pass the ball, you were stupid to try to pass the ball. The forward pass had been legalized in football in 1906, but nobody used it. It had sort of come up in college, and in 33, the NFL changed the rules to open up the passing game a little bit more, and still nobody did anything with it. But the Redskins gave it a shot to Baugh, who passed the ball all over the field for a whole 1,100 and I think it was 1,127 yards. I might be wrong about that in his rookie season, and led the Redskins to a championship and really changed the game, turned the NFL into a passing league. And this book, in a lot of ways, is about tracing the evolution of the pass over the course of 75 years. The problem with that, what's great about that is that you can look at how the game has changed. The problem it sets up for me is that I also need to go back and be able to compare Tom Brady to Sammy Baugh. Well, they were playing different games. Particularly in the late 70s and early 80s, the NFL took a real interest in opening up the passing game and started truly tweaking the rules to bring about the game that we have now. So to go back before, let's say, Montana, and try to compare quarterbacks from the 70s and the 60s with people who are playing the game today, it's a difficult thing. And then to go back even further than that to 1937, you end up really not being able to do it. There's the grace of passer rating, which is a fantastic statistic that, as much as everybody hates it, it's a wonderful statistic. And one of the great things about it for me is that it can be applied back across eras, because it's based on 4 measures that the NFL has been tracking since it was an NFL, or since it was a passing game. So it allows you to go back and do that, and so that gives you a little bit better ability to compare a Tom Brady to a Sammy Baugh. But ultimately, you're making a lot of judgment calls.
How did you differentiate between salary cap era and pre-salary cap?
Well, that's another tough one, and to me, that's one of the arguments that plays into the Brady and Montana comparison, because Montana played his entire career, except for one season, in a pre-salary cap league. Montana played on a 49ers team that was stacked with talent, because you didn't have a salary cap, and you didn't have real free agency. Real free agency only came in again at the end of Montana's career. So you had teams that you had a league where good teams stayed good and bad teams stayed bad. And you could really collect talent over time. And as a result, Montana played on teams that he had a lot more weapons around him than Brady ever has. The same thing goes frankly for Bart Starr. Bart Starr's Green Bay Packers were absolutely loaded with Hall of Famers. And they weren't people who cycled onto the team for a couple of years and then cycled off on the other side. They were people who were together for years and years. That said, if you're going to compare You're going to take a stat like passer rating and say, well, I'm going to apply this back across eras, regardless of rules that were changed to open up the passing game. I think at the same time, to a certain degree, you have to take that sort of same set of statistics and apply it across eras, regardless of the fact that that there were sort of different rules involving who could stay with a team, who would be on a team year in and year out. And the beauty of that comparison, though, is that you take the salary cap era that Brady plays in, where it's considerably more difficult to have success over time, and the non-salary cap era, then in the non-salary cap era, and Brady still comes out better, and he has better success over a longer period of time than a lot of people who played the position during the salary cap era, the non-salary cap era, and to me that's one of the great arguments in Brady's favor.
Now, you mentioned Montana and his Super Bowl record and victories, and many, if not most people, measure athletes' greatness in championships. So how much weight did you afford to Super Bowl victories or even appearances?
A considerable amount. I think that the only quarterback there's only two quarterbacks in this book who never won a championship. There are quarterbacks who never won a Super Bowl because there was no Super Bowl when they were playing. Dan Marino, who I felt like I had to include because he's one of the greatest passers who's ever held a football in his hand, and I couldn't leave him out for the mere fact that he didn't win a Super Bowl. And Jim Kelly, who is the only quarterback, to my mind, one of the most unappreciated figures in NFL history, certainly in recent NFL history, because he's the only quarterback who ever led a team to 4 straight Super Bowls, which is an astonishing accomplishment. He didn't win any of them. If he had won 2 of them, we'd think of him in a much different way. But I think ultimately, when you're going to get to that, so I think that you can leave championships out of the equation of who's great and who isn't great, to a certain extent. But when you get to sort of who's the best of the best, you have to start factoring that stuff in. And so you again get to Montana, and you get to Starr, who won multiple championships, and you get to Brady, and you get to John Elway, who played in 5 Super Bowls, only won 2 of them. And then you take this crazy left corner and you land at Terry Bradshaw. And Terry Bradshaw is sort of the monkey wrench in the whole championship part of the equation, because Terry Bradshaw, like Joe Montana, went to 4 Super Bowls and won all 4 of them. And by no other standard was Terry Bradshaw a great quarterback. Terry Bradshaw, great big game quarterback. Terry Bradshaw, great figure in the history of football, and a lot of people grew up watching the Steelers of the 70s and remembered Terry Bradshaw and his heroics. He was a terrific athlete, a great competitor, but not a great quarterback. So Terry Bradshaw sort of shakes you out of this. If you go into it with a belief that championships are the be-all and end-all, Terry Bradshaw is a great cure for that. And that's not to put Terry Bradshaw down. It's just to say that you can't look at the entirety of his career and come up with, well, he's top 5 or maybe even top 10. So it sort of puts you back into that place where you're looking at other things to gauge greatness. But yeah, in the end, if you haven't been to the Super Bowl, if you haven't or been to a league championship and won it, you ultimately don't make that cut for who's in the conversation of whatever the 5 best.
But why not? Because isn't getting to a Super Bowl dependent on many things that are completely outside a quarterback's control?
Sure it is. And no one could probably tell you, not that I think he would, but no one could tell you that more, could make that case better than Dan Marino. There's no question when you look at what Dan Marino accomplished in his career that he was a great quarterback, a great passer. We hear a lot about Tom Brady and the talent that he's been surrounded with, and particularly the wide receiver talent that he's had to work with. And it hasn't been, over the full scope of his career, it hasn't been great. He's worked with some fine wide receivers. I'm a big fan of Troy Brown. But they haven't been sort of the cream of the NFL crop, except for the couple of years where Brady was paired with Randy Moss and then, turned records on their ears. Dan Marino had that situation through his whole career. He never had great wide receiver talent around him. You have to have a good offensive line. You have to have good wide receivers. You need a lot of factors. You're going to have great coaching. Dan Marino had great coaching. But you have to be able to demonstrate that you can make it work at the highest level of the game. Is it fair? I don't know. I think there are probably a lot of great athletes who never earned a championship and who are sort of brushed aside because they operated in a team that couldn't get it done. Archie Manning is one of those people who would certainly tell you, I'm sure he would tell you himself, that he was one of the greats who never got a fair deal. I'm not sure that that's true of Archie. But you're the quarterback. The quarterback is the hardest position in all of professional sports to play, and it's also the part of that is because it's the linchpin of an NFL offense. And if your team doesn't make it to a championship, some of the responsibility for that has to fall on the quarterback. So, yeah, it's not fair, but a lot of things aren't fair.
How much of an effect do receivers play in a quarterback's ranking? Certainly, good receivers directly affect passing statistics.
They certainly do. And they do in a number of ways. They do, we had, I'm sure folks are familiar with after Super Bowl 46, Brady's wife telling media in an elevator that her husband couldn't catch the balls. We had, again in Super Bowl 46, a back shoulder pass to Wes Welker that Welker catches in most situations and didn't catch then, and it's one of the deciding factors in the game. If you, looking at Brady's career, if you go back to the epic collapse that the Patriots experienced in the 2006 AFC Championship game against Indianapolis, where Indianapolis came back from a huge deficit to beat them. Well, there were opportunities for the Patriots to put that game away, and they played out in the form of dropped passes. All that stuff sort of factors in. I think that those things tend to factor in more in the course of a game or a season than in the course of a career. Those things have a way of evening themselves out over the course of a career if you play in a program that has it together. And we also see with quarterbacks like Brady and like Peyton Manning, their ability to elevate the play of the talent that's around them. Tom Brady wins Super Bowls with David Patton catching and Troy Brown catching his passes. These are terrifically talented athletes, but they're not the best in the league. That said, your receiver talent contributes to yards after the catch, which, in the way NFL statistics are figured, are part of a passing play. So if Tom Brady throws a 3-yard pass and the receiver takes it 62 yards afterwards, that's a 65-yard passing play. He gets credit for, and that's factored into his yards per attempt. And it counts the same way as it would another quarterback who's someone with a bigger arm, Brett Favre, just heaving the ball downfield 65 yards and catching it. I'm not sure that there's enough of a difference in how those 65 yards get compiled to hold it against one quarterback or the other. I think ultimately football's a team sport. Everyone on the team, certainly everyone on the offense, contributes to the quarterback's success. But every quarterback is ultimately in the same situation. They're all playing as one of 11 people, and sometimes you have better talent around you, sometimes you have lesser, and when you factor it out over the course of a long career, and anybody who we're talking about as the greatest of all time has had a long career, it evens out, at least to an extent that you can then start to sort of get inside that stuff and talk about, you know, what parts of that make this person better than that person. Whether you've played your whole career with, well, not your whole career, whether you've played with Jerry Rice or you've played with David Patton, starts to become a factor only when you actually attain that level.
You didn't elevate Brady's status very much based on the fact that, as you note, he really didn't have Hall of Fame caliber around him, save Randy Moss.
I didn't need to. I mean, he elevated himself. Again, you can talk about the contributions that talent makes, but I think in Brady's case, what you talk about is not only did he accomplish more, but he accomplished more arguably with less.
Whereas Montana
accomplished
it with some talent around him.
Right, and this is not to say that Brady hasn't had talent around him, and certainly in the last few years of his career, he's got some of the best tight ends, possibly at least one, possibly two of the best tight ends ever to play the game.
Looks like that's your next book.
Possibly, possibly. So the talent is there at times, but Brady has a way of making the most of whatever talent he has on the field, which every great quarterback does. Montana did that. Steve Young did that. Steve Young maybe did that better than Montana did, but he did it for a shorter time, so we don't talk about him as being at quite the same level as Montana. You know, Brady does things like throw to his receiver's back shoulder, which people look at that play in Super Bowl 46 and say, how did he throw that pass to the wrong place? The fact is that he didn't. He threw it to the place where the defender couldn't get it and his receiver could, and he threw it to a receiver who had caught that pass at least a dozen times during the season. Brady throws passes low, and people say, boy, it's a great thing that the receiver got down there and got that, and it is. It's not that they're making up for Brady's error. He put the ball where only his receiver could get it. He's not the only guy who's ever done that. He's just the best guy who's ever done that.
Was there one statistical category that you emphasized more than all the others?
Well, I think much to the chagrin of people who despise the stat, passer rating. Passer rating is it's a statistic that people really, really hate because it's hard to understand, or they think it's hard to understand. That's really just an absolutely beautiful statistic when you sort of get your head around it. Passer rating, in reality, it's all it is a way of looking at some fairly simple measurables: attempts, completions, touchdowns, interceptions, and yardage. And the formula is complicated, but you don't need to know the formula. I mean, unless you're a statistician or you're some nut like me who wants to crunch the passer rating numbers of every quarterback at the end of every game. And even then, there's an abundance of calculators that you can find online for passer rating. What's important, I think, for people to understand about passer rating is that it was a statistic that was created in 1971, and it was created to be able to compare passers over a season. So the goal was to be able to say at the end of every season that this was the most successful passer in the league. Not the most successful quarterback, the most successful passer, which these days really translates to the most successful quarterback, but it's not quite the same thing. And the formula got twisted up because what the people who created it wanted to do was have a stat that would come out at 100 if you were excellent. It comes out at 158.3 if you're perfect, right? 153.8, sorry. And that's the number that people seize on and say, well, that's nuts. Why is that? Because nobody has a perfect season in the NFL. We start applying it to games, and sometimes you get perfect. You know, Tom Brady's had 2 perfect games in his career. Peyton Manning has had 4, and that's the most ever. It's supposed to be applied to seasons. It's supposed to be applied to careers, and so you'd shoot for a number that's about 100. And if you're at 100, you've done something really special, or at these days done something really good. You need to be upwards of 120 nowadays to be really special. But in 1971, 100 was really phenomenal. And so, to me, what's important for people to know about that passer rating statistic is that if you're in the 90s, it's looking pretty good. If you're 100 to 120, wow. 120 to 140, you've probably, the chances that you lost that game pretty slim, and 140 up, and you just had a performance for the ages. And because it takes those really key measurables into consideration, the touchdowns, the completions, and the interceptions, it's really, to my mind, the most complete stat for comparing passers, not only from game to game and season to season and person to person, but across eras.
But as you alluded to, the passer rating, and actually also your other categories that you cite in the book, don't take into account rushing touchdowns or rushing yardage. Doesn't that devalue somehow some of your more nimble quarterbacks like a Steve Young? I would never say Michael Vick's a great quarterback, but it does take away from his game as well.
It does, I suppose. Oddly enough, Steve Young has some of the best single-season passer ratings in NFL history. Steve Young was a great mobile quarterback, but he was also a great passer. And part of the reason that he was a great mobile quarterback was he was a great passer. The quarterback position in the NFL is a passing position. I had someone recently challenge me about Brady and his inability to run, or his purported inability to run. Let's face it, his inability to run. Every now and again, he runs for a first down. And it wasn't about that makes him a bad quarterback. The contention was that Brady isn't tough enough. That if the first down is, if the lane for the first down is open to him, he doesn't take it. He waits for the pass. And my response to that is that that's not because he isn't tough. It's because running the ball isn't the quarterback's job. That may be changing. Robert Griffin III is the first quarterback I've seen since Steve Young who is truly mobile and is an incredibly talented, accurate passer. You have people like Vick who can run the ball, but no one's ever going to accuse Michael Vick of being a great passer, and so he's not a great quarterback. He's a great something, great running back, pretending to be a quarterback or something. And if more people, Cam Newton has had some great success running the ball and is also a pretty good passer. He's not at RG3's level, but his yards per attempt are certainly fantastic. Maybe people like that are going to change the game. Maybe we're coming to an era where where we're going to have the kind of athlete who can run consistently and who can throw the ball accurately on a consistent basis. We haven't really seen that up till now, here or there. To this date, and this book is written through the end of the 2011 season, and I would say that the case it makes is true well into 2012. The quarterback position in the NFL is a passing position, and if you can run the ball, that's great, and if you can't, that's fine too. Your job is to throw the ball. the other thing about running quarterbacks is that they take a beating. And so there remains question, even as some great running quarterbacks emerge, whether they'll be able to stay in the league, or if they do stay in the league, whether they'll eventually have to become pocket passers, because you can't, there's a reason that running backs' careers last 8 seasons. You take too much punishment.
How much of a factor was a team's defense in your analysis? Certainly better defenses result in more offensive opportunities.
Better defenses do result in more offensive opportunities, and it has to be some factor. We hear a lot, detractors of Brady like to talk about how he, particularly early in his career, was buoyed by the Patriots defense. Hasn't necessarily been true the last couple of years. And, there's some truth to that. I mean, he was, I wouldn't agree that he was carried by the defense, but a great defense makes a contribution. You don't win championships unless you have at least a very good defense. When you get right into it, the quarterbacks who appear in this book, who are the quarterbacks who would be on most lists of the greatest ever, virtually all played on teams with better than average defenses, top 10 defenses most of their careers. Joe Montana keeps coming back to Montana, but that's just the way it is with arguing for the greatest against the greatest. Joe Montana played on teams with better defenses by and large than Tom Brady has played on. Terry Bradshaw arguably has 4 Super Bowl rings because he played on a team with a great defense. Terry Bradshaw's job was to hand the ball off to running backs and to not let the defense's good work go to waste. But for the most part, I'm looking at people who played on offenses that were supported by great defenses. Maybe to a lesser extent, Peyton Manning's Colts and Tom Brady's recent New England Patriots. Other than that, and you also look at in the current NFL, the Green Bay Packers. Aaron Rodgers has had great success, though he had most of his success with teams that did have great defenses. He's now having success with a team that does not, by any sort of standard, they have a good defense. In the same way that the Patriots have a good defense, they round into form at the right time. They don't have a great defense. But for the most part, again, going back through history, you just don't find successful quarterbacks on teams with lousy defenses. You're always trying to make up. You're always trying to catch up.
And how much of a role does coaching play in this, both in terms of quantity and quality? I think most, if not all, of the quarterbacks you compare him to in the book played under excellent or Hall of Fame coaches. Right.
And that's one of the factors that's sort of hardest to work around. Rarely in NFL history do you find great quarterbacks without great coaches, great coaches without great quarterbacks. I say that, and then I'll tell you that that's not true. There certainly have been great coaches who weren't paired with great quarterbacks, and great quarterbacks who weren't paired with great coaches. We just don't talk about them because they didn't achieve success. You have to have both. One of the criticisms that's frequently leveled at Tom Brady is that he's a system quarterback. Not every great quarterback. Most great quarterbacks, certainly the best of the best, have been system quarterbacks. They bring a lot to the field. One of the things they bring to the field, and this was true of Bart Starr, it was true of Joe Montana, it's certainly true of Tom Brady, and we see it in people like Rodgers and Breeze nowadays. Their great ability is their ability to execute, or one of their great abilities is their ability to execute their coach's system. They're system quarterbacks. you have people. Johnny Unitas wasn't anybody's idea of a system quarterback. Johnny Unitas went out there and chunked the ball around and made things happen because he was a great athlete and a great leader on the field. Peyton Manning is not a system quarterback. He is the coach on the field. So he is the great quarterback and the great coach rolled together. And no insult to Tony Dungy, but I sort of have this notion that Tony Dungy is a great defensive coach whose great offensive accomplishment was looking at Peyton Manning and saying, well, you know what you're doing, just go do it. But more often than not, the two things are inseparable: great quarterback, great coach, if you're going to achieve a level of success. So then you get to start to asking the question of, well, how much was quarterback and how much was coach? It's hard to tell with Tom Brady because he's only played under one coach. A little easier with Montana, who played under two coaches, and one in San Francisco and one in Kansas City, and had success in both places. Seems to be indicative of the fact that he could succeed in different systems. Peyton Manning has now translated his success from Indianapolis to Denver. But again, Peyton Manning is sort of doing his own thing. Bart Starr is one of the places where you run into some trouble because Bart Starr didn't have a lot of success before Vince Lombardi came along, and particularly Vince Lombardi's system, which, much like Bill Walsh's system in San Francisco years later, was revolutionary at the time and set up a lot of success. Bart Starr also didn't have a lot of success after he was divorced of Lombardi. There it's pretty clear that it's and this does not, to my mind, take anything away from Starr. He was fantastic at executing the system. But that's a clear case where coach and quarterback needed each other, and where the quarterback's success is substantially attributable to the coach. I don't know how to I don't know how to correct for that with Brady, and I suspect that I never will have that ability because I don't think he's ever playing for another coach.
Which is what we'd like. Well, Sean, I have to tell you, you make such a compelling argument for Brady being the greatest. I was looking for places where I could challenge you in the book, and I really couldn't find anything significant. Your numbers for each quarterback comparison, they really support your claim and make your case for you. So I want to thank you for being with us, and tell the viewers to, if you want to be able to argue why Brady's the best, to read your book.
Thank you so much.
Massachusetts School of Law. Legal education that is practical, accessible, affordable, and enjoyable. Offering flexible day and evening classes, full or part-time studies, where candidates are assessed not on the LSAT, but their academic and other accomplishments. Providing more professional skills training than any other law school in New England. Massachusetts School of Law. Visit us at mslaw.edu. Training students to become successful lawyers and advocates, not just legal scholars.
Hi, this is Denny Hamlin. I want to share with you today a little known but widely pervasive neurological disorder called dyspraxia. It's estimated that dyspraxia affects between 4 and 10% of the general population, and the majority of those affected are male. The condition primarily affects motor skills, but also can affect memory, judgment, and executive function. It's sometimes referred as the hidden disability because it's not immediately obvious to others that the person affected has special needs. My niece Sarah has dyspraxia, and with the proper support in place, she is very successful in school and other activities. Sarah was lucky because she was diagnosed early. Many children and adults go years without knowing. Let's raise awareness for this disability that affects 1 in 11 people. I encourage you to learn more, get involved, and support the Dyspraxia Foundation USA.